right, folks, this is Masters of Podcasting. I'm
Yay.
Conley.
I'm Melissa.
And we are going to talk about episode 2, Race to Space.
What an awesome thing that we are getting to do another one. I'm excited.
I know. I like this trend.
Yes, me too. So this was the first episode that aired with the opening credits. And I wanted to ask you what you think of them if you're a fan, because I think they've kind of divided people. There are some people who are adamantly against them, and there are some people who are, okay with them. What do you think of the opening credits?
I think they are great. That sort of tongue-in-cheek humor I've always enjoyed. Especially like if you've ever seen The Naked Gun or anything like that.
Right.
It's that kind of, borderline physical comedy, sort of sly wink. And I always enjoy that. I think that's funny, personally.
Yeah. I guess I tolerate longer credits. I wish that there would be a quicker get to the start of the episode, get to the sex, get to the drama. But like you, I appreciate the tongue-in-cheek humor. I know there are some reviewers who have said things like, well, for the weighty subject matter of this show, it's just really inappropriate that they have this, really silly, juvenile kind of teenage boy wink at the idea. But really, I think Michelle Ashford has said in interviews that she thinks the show is very lighthearted, because it's not, we're always going to compare this to Mad Men, but it's obviously not Mad Men, but it's not as weighty and dramatic. It is about the creation of life and, this physical joy and all these things. So really, I can see where it does kind of fit in.
Well, and I think, too, in some ways having a longer credit sequence reminds me of older shows where they really, you weren't only getting a flash of someone's name over, the first scene of the episode. It was, let's take some time and remind the audience these are the topics of the day. These are our characters. These are our people. And I kind of enjoy that. I think that's a nice nod to, especially given the time in which the show is based, it's a nice nod to classic television and to something that's kind of fallen by the wayside. Lost,
it definitely is not. That flash of the title and an ominous noise, which I agree. I kind of like that too. So in this episode we see Henry and Tessa for the first time, and they're kind of interesting. Certainly interesting little character actors, the kids who play them. Did you have any kind of direct feeling about them this early in the game?
I guess I did, in that I think they cast their actors pretty well, because with a lot of child actors, you either get very sort of twee and pretentious and just overly obnoxiously cute, or you get, a kid who feels more true to life, and these kids, they're not really given much to do and not a whole lot to say, but they don't feel scripted in the way that some children do on certain shows. So I at least enjoyed that much,
Yeah, I think it's throughout the episode, but Henry just, he is simultaneously the worst, like in that John Ralphio Parks and Recreation way. He just makes me just, and then at the same time you're like, but that takes effort to, it's not just the writing that makes a kid like that. It takes some effort on the part of the actor. So kudos to him for putting that in there. But then obviously what we want to start out talking about this episode is the fact that Ginny goes through this internal version of Bill. She has these little scenarios that she plays out in her head, kind of like you do. And that's also a theme throughout the episode, is people fantasizing about other people, and her version of Bill shifts and changes. Part of me thought, well, she's not really being realistic in the final version, because she's trying as hard as she can to get him to, respond diplomatically and respect her, and then she gets there and it's just a complete shutdown, and he yells at her and fires her, and that's a sucky way to start your day. But later on, we do see the same thing happening with Bill, so I think that kind of sets up a parallel between them. Obviously, not only as the protagonist, but also as kind of a contrast to Ethan, who also throughout this episode has fantasies of Virginia having sex with him and playing up this really coquettish version of her that's very playful and flirtatious. And I guess what it must have been like, starting out with, having sex with her. But really, it's very to his advantage, as a fantasy would be, of course. But So we have these different fantasies throughout. Did you have any thoughts on kind of Ginny's, the way she played out those reactions from Bill?
It was interesting to me, just sort of on a whole, and like you said, seeing all the different characters in the way that they imagine people will respond to them and the way they expect people to act, in these different situations. Because I really felt that one of the themes of this episode was sort of in the pilot, it's a lot about the mechanics of sex and the physical and physiological responses. This one felt more like it was about the perception of sex, because there's so much emotional weight I felt that was on the table. You have, Bill making this proposition to Jenny, who is trying to figure out the best way to either deny it or accept it. You have Ethan, who wishes he was with Jenny and is making propositions to these other women instead. It very much was sort of an internalized conflict, and I really liked that, and sort of the different ways that they portrayed that in each character, sort of trying to go through their head and visualize, okay, if I was talking about sex with Bill and this, offer that he made me, this is how I would phrase it and this is how he would react, and just kind of seeing how their imagination plays out versus the reality, like you said, of Bill shouting at Jenny and then firing her. I really liked that. I thought that felt very true to life.
His reaction to her in that early scene, I feel like throughout this episode he gets punished for it pretty well. I mean,
right.
Karmic justice in a way, but I think the biggest response to him from kind of the universe generally, and that sounds pretentious, is the fact that the three women that he interacts with throughout this episode all wind up getting what they want, very much against his wishes. Like, he comes in and storms in and you defied me and all this stuff, and he throws, he pitches fits at women and tries to lash out at them and get what he wants, and all the women at the end wind up getting exactly what they wanted through three distinct, very separate methods. Ginny is very careful, very calculating, like I said before, very diplomatic, and she kind of goes behind his back and manipulates the situation with the secretary candidates, and she kind of comes out ahead just by listening and picking up on information that if she were just feeling sorry for herself and were just thinking about the next secretarial job that she could take on, she probably wouldn't have noticed.
Yeah, I really felt like this episode was a lot about female agency and sexuality as opposed to the study of human sexuality. It wasn't, you can kind of see where we're making that leap from this is a purely academic undertaking to, well, we are talking about sex. It's going to be awkward. It's going to be embarrassing. It's going to be strange. And particularly Virginia trying to balance Henry and really figure out her job situation after being fired, and with Libby sort of taking control of her own fertility treatment against Bill's wishes and, just completely defying him. I really liked that.
Libby really only has one, I guess, weapon or tool to wield in her continuing fight to use her own agency, and that is just, I don't know, just wearing him down and exasperation, and she finally just gets away from the polite debutante, and I mean that in a nice way, methods that she's just she always tries to go along to get along. She tries to be, go along with his crazy schemes, and her life is wrapped up in his career futures. So, I mean, obviously there's a reason she reacts the way she does in the car when she's driving him home from jail. In the last scene where she just flat out demands having Ethan back, it's just kind of this no, and I'm just going to keep telling you no until you do what I want.
A few scenes after she drives him home from jail, and you see Libby and Bill in their bedroom, and she's trying to figure out, is this study something that excites him personally, as opposed to, is this just another one of Bill's weird, dispassionate undertakings?
That was so sad.
It was, but the phrase that leapt to my mind was in Victorian literature and Victorian society, they really sort of came up with this phrase for housewives and for what they believed a woman's role was, and that was the angel of the home.
Yes.
And that was, especially in lieu of Bill's reaction to that, When he says, Libby, I love you too much for you to do this, even though for about 10 seconds you can sort of see his interested face.
Yeah.
But that was really what that reminded me of, because Libby, she very much occupies this not platonic role in his life, but it's very much supposed to be an asexual function.
She's an abstraction to him. They're very good friends. Obviously, I mean, they get along with each other on a certain level, and you see that throughout other episodes as well. He's charming to her, and he tries to be sympathetic, but there's still always this undercurrent of, well, you're just always going to do what I want for us, and if what I want for us is to very conveniently not have children and for me to lie to you, then that's just a means to an end.
And she's very much the congenial hostess and sort of, I won't say gal pal, but you know what I mean? She
fills a purpose.
Yeah, it's more of a marriage of convenience, even though Bill does, admit that when he looks at her, he sees love, that kind of thing.
So, and then I guess the third female reaction or female manipulation, it just sounds like such a negative word, but that's really what it is. Just kind of the machination of trying to get out of Bill what you want to get out of him is Betty. And she brings her A game this episode. I love Betty.
I do too. I mean, she's a very shrewd woman in that she knows, exactly what the stakes are and knows how much this project means to Bill on a personal level. And so she is just hands down going for it.
What I think my favorite scene with her this episode was when he shows up at the brothel in broad daylight, knocks at the back door, and not just her funny little line about being a backdoor man, but just the way she kind of takes care of him is giving him a cup of coffee or a cup of tea. And it's real talk. She just brings this realness that is unassailable. He can't, you cannot imagine Bill, I mean, he attempts this towards the end of the episode, Bill telling Betty what to do. She's just not going to have it. She's not going to, just accept it and roll over the way Libby kind of is forced to by her position, by the expectations of society. Betty just kind of turns and faces him and says, no, this is what's going to happen. And if you don't, here's what's going to come out of that. That's nice to see, because I think it's even different from the way Ginny approaches him this early in the series. She's still not totally at that point where they know each other well enough for her to say, now hang on a second, here's how it's going to be.
Right, I definitely agree. I feel like this episode, in as much as the pilot was sort of establishing, here's Bill Masters, god of obstetrics, look at the control he wields over this hospital, even though his, personal study can't get funded. This episode was very much about saying, look at Bill Masters, he may be the god of obstetrics, but here's the way that other people look at him due to, whatever quirk of circumstance, personality difference, that sort of thing.
And this episode really claims the difference between Bill being this super scientific, awkward, distant, just totally detached person, and obviously Ginny as the warm, appealing to the human side, sort of slowly seducing, I guess, in a platonic kind of way, the prostitutes into joining the study and not backing out just because it's awkward. And I think one of the better things that came out of that, and this is just a tiny little thing, was when Bill shows up at the brothel for the first time with his equipment. One of the prostitutes comes by and, is kind of coy and flirting with him, and he goes, greetings. Like every awkward high school nerd ever, just like the stupidest thing comes out of his mouth, greetings.
Yeah, that was a nice moment, and I particularly loved that block of scenes where he's there, explaining the equipment to the girls as if they're interns or first-year medical students. And meanwhile, there's some mover in the background just, slack-jawed because there's a naked woman in front of him, and Bill has no eyes for that.
Yeah. Did you know that Maureen was the oldest daughter from, did you recognize her as being on The Nanny the first time you watched this?
I didn't at first, which is surprising given the amount of times I have watched The Nanny in my life.
She looks so different. I didn't know that until it was passed around on the internet. There was a huge ripple of shock, and this is another one of these things. These prestige-style dramas set in the deep past are apparently great watering holes for, I guess, previous sitcom actors to come and, get some work again and do something, and that was a nice surprise.
Yeah, we're getting a lot of 90s and 80s actors and actresses just sort of coming out of the woodwork and shedding the, I guess, most popular characters in favor of these sort of one time roles, which I really love, honestly.
I love it because it's not like they require, I mean, they're just like a guest actor, so it's not like they
Right.
require some big casting announcement. So when it's like a pleasant surprise, like, oh my gosh, I remember this person, I remember that role that they were in, and look at them, they're this complete opposite, they're in the next episode, she'll be up on a bed, masturbating, and that'll be a total contrast from what we remember her in, and that's an awesome thing that these shows get to do things like that.
And I like, too, they're very casual about it. It's almost a little bit sly. There's no, it's a very special episode. Look who we have here today.
Unlike the original shows that those actors would have been on in the 80s and 90s, where they would have
Right.
just, pole danced the hell out of that and just really, really shown that off. So,
Right. Nicolette Tom guest stars.
yeah, exactly. So then we have the police raid as the cap on a thoroughly awkward and awful evening, and and I feel like this is kind of the beginnings of the karmic justice for Bill's shittiness earlier in the episode, and
Were you surprised that they sort of had this revealed this early with Libby finding out exactly what Bill is up to in this mysterious study?
see, because I'd read the book, I was anticipating the moment when the chief of police was going to come in and bail him out, and then the business about not having the raids while Bill was conducting the study in the brothel. I had a moment where when the chief of police says something like, I don't know how you're going to explain this to her. And Bill turns around, and then there's that like split second before it's revealed that it's Libby sitting there. I thought, oh my gosh, is it going to be Ginny? Of course it wouldn't be, logically. But that just goes to show how early on in the season I was hoping for him to take her into his confidence and for them to be buddies again, his girl Friday, at least in this decade. I was really glad that he had that car ride and talk with Libby because it felt like, I know we've had glimpses into their relationship over the first two episodes like this, but I felt like this was the first conversation they had where it felt like they were actually talking to each other on some level, and it wasn't preceded by her calling him daddy, and there wasn't so much this weird patronizing relationship that they normally kind of conduct in the privacy of their home. It was really more, oh, that's what you're doing, and no, you don't tell me anything. And you really just got a sense of the combination of Libby's love for him along with just her outrage and just pure rage over not being helpless in trying to communicate with him and get him to like reach out to her.
Yeah, I definitely love that scene as well because, you sort of have Bill who really is not embarrassed over much at all, if anything, but he is embarrassed about this, and he really can't think of a good way to talk himself out of it. Even though I don't think that would be his intention, it's just one of those rare and thankfully wonderful moments where you just see Libby saying, "Look, I know exactly what this is. I just don't understand why you didn't tell me and why, you would keep something so big from me."
And I think that was the first time when I really truly saw Libby as something other than the potentially naive housewife that's kept in the dark. Like, here she really demonstrates intelligent. I mean, she is a smart person, but she demonstrates a value beyond merely a trope of the downtrodden housewife. I felt like this was the first time, when she threatened to crash the car into his side. That was funny, and it was, a little brutal and sarcastic, but it was, I don't know, it was more humanizing in a way for me. I felt like that was the first time when I was like, oh, Libby's great.
I think you definitely get a more real sense of their marriage and sort of the friendship that attracted them to it, as opposed to, well, here's Bill and Libby and this is his sort of stilted home life. You really get a better sense of why these two people would have taken up together and gotten along, even in the midst of a very significant moment and fight in their relationship.
And it's really too bad that Bill doesn't recognize that she could be an awesome confidant.
Yes.
It's really too bad. He's just really pigeonholed her as, so far removed from anything that he's doing. And I guess I don't know that we got a real, like, definable explanation for that this season. Like, why he forcefully detaches her from this. when she desperately wants to be taken into his confidence, and she tries, and she goes and she thinks about it, and then she tries to kind of justify it, and she tries to get involved, and he's just not having it.
Yeah, I really did appreciate how much she tried to be frank with him, particularly in light of her own shyness, because, in the pilot episode, like I said, she's got that hesitancy. She's really, you know, obviously she realizes this is what we're going to have to do in order to start a family, but you can tell she's very deeply uncomfortable with the topic in general.
But I think in the pilot episode, one thing that I forgot to mention, and I was rewatching it last night. There's that scene where she prays, and then they're sitting on the bed.
Yes.
She reaches for his bow tie and is getting really passionate and is trying to take his clothes off for him, and he just shuts her down and turns her over, and it's totally, all the rejection is from him. Libby's not shy necessarily about sex. She's uncomfortable, maybe because she doesn't have the vocabulary for it, and because it's been kind of the naturalism that, say, Ginny and Betty bring to it are kind of because they are against societal norms, and for Libby, it's been trained into her to be very delicate and ladylike about it. But I think she'd really like to get to that point, but she just doesn't know how to be forceful enough to get his attention the way, say, Betty does to get him to perform the tubal ligation.
Well, and I guess maybe shy might be the wrong word, but like you said, she doesn't have that sort of commanding presence to say, this is exactly what I want from you, this is what I'm not getting from you, I need you to do X, Y, and Z in order to fix it.
Which almost makes me think that Ginny is kind of not to call Ginny a prostitute, but Ginny's kind of a combination of Libby's genteelness and kind of the reaching out to him, wanting to appeal to him emotionally, and the executive realness that Betty brings to the table. She's a nice in-between.
Yeah,
maybe
I definitely see that.
Maybe these three scenarios with these women are kind of setting that up. That's how Ginny will become the success. That's how she will get her in.
Well, and I like that because it, by not having sort of the usual dichotomy, here's Ginny, she's free-spirited and open and blah, blah, blah. Here's Libby, she's more reserved and genteel. You've got more of a spectrum to work with as far as there aren't just two types of women. Women can be along any of this particular scale, so...
Yeah, which is great. And I liked in the scenes when the camera would pan across the prostitutes when they were waiting for Bill to kind of start the demonstration, you really did get a sense of they each had different personalities, and they were friends. It felt like a sleepaway camp, like they were hanging out at summer camp or something.
Yeah, I really like the way that they constructed those scenes, because I think in a lot of other shows, there's sometimes a danger of, oh, we're in a cat house, let's show them all as these tragic figures. There was a real levity to just the way they set those scenes up, and to the girls, and like you said, there was genuine friendship, and I won't say fun, but there was a nice dynamic there between all the different cast members, which I appreciated. It was nice to see them treating prostitution as a serious subject and not just something to either be made fun of or turned into some Shakespearean tragedy.
And it was exactly the way Betty put it when Bill came to visit and had the drink. She said, that's our living.
And especially, do you remember the name of the girl who had headaches? And
Dottie.
Especially with that storyline, I had a lot of sympathy for her, because here she is, she's a young girl, this is, really the only living she's been able to carve out for herself, and something as simple as getting medical care has changed the entire way that she perceives her life,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was, when I first watched it, I thought it was a really sweet scene when he leans over and puts the glasses on her, and she starts crying and takes his hands and is thanking him so much, and it's a funny little moment when she offers him a blowjob, and he's kind of laughs and is awkward and turns it down. I remember reading somewhere that someone took that as kind of an extension of Bill's God complex, like he delays telling her what's actually wrong with her so that he can really indulge in this moment of feeling like he's fixed her and now he's so amazing. And I can see where someone might make that interpretation, but I really just took that as a genuine Bill likes to help people because, they genuinely appreciate it. Bill genuinely likes to be a doctor and help other people.
Yeah, and I mean, especially with sort of a young, marginalized woman, I won't say that that's something Bill really loves as far as, I want to help this subset of people, but I think given his family history, it's something that he would be aware of and maybe would take more satisfaction in than, oh, I helped, this random patient who came into my office.
Yeah, and he just seemed much happier in that moment. It was kind of funny. Then you watch the other scenes where he's helping his paying patients, and he puts on a different face.
Yes.
He has that very serious, stoic face. Bill arguing with Betty about the tubal ligation reversal. The whole scene where she blackmails him into performing the operation for her. When I first saw that, I got this feeling that that would be the kind of thing that Bill would remember. That kind of, really not sudden turnaround, but just the obviousness of the betrayal of it and just how political or Machiavellian it was would be the kind of thing that he would remember. And given the trailers that we've seen for season 2, kind of hints, I think, at a reversal of their roles, like Bill having the opportunity to blackmail Betty in order to get something out of her.
Well, I could definitely see that being a sticking point for him because Bill is used to getting his way in all things, not just, in his medical practice, but on a general level. And
yeah.
So here, all of a sudden, you have somebody wheeling her way into his normal territory and saying, look, this is your specialty, this is your field, but here are the things you need. I'm not going to do that unless you give me the operation that I want. And I think that was, I don't know if shocking is the right word, but it definitely would hit home with him in a way that I think maybe a separate request would not have landed as well.
Yeah, Betty definitely knows how to play games.
What did you think as far as the conversation between Betty and Jenny when Jenny has been tasked to sort of talk her out of getting this operation done?
I couldn't quite figure out if she agreed with Bill, if she was going into it with the intent of getting the job done to, patch things up with him, and then she slowly changes her mind. The one thing that I did note was Jenny thinking that her kids were and she says this, the only thing she could ever truly love. And that's a very important aspect of the biography. When she did get married the first couple of times, she never had wedding portraits taken. I think she experienced guilt at being divorced, but I think she knew it was the right thing to do in those situations. I remember reading in the biography that Jenny just felt like just never being able to love anyone after going through all of that. If she's going to get divorced this many times, it's pretty much never going to be permanent. And choosing to have children is, and having them be the only thing she could ever truly love was the one thing that she could do for herself.
Interesting.
What did you think of it?
Well, I guess with Ginny's marriages, particularly in that scene with Betty, you can tell that Ginny is not the kind of person who would dream of a white wedding. She's not really sentimental or fanciful about that aspect of being married. I think she does realize the power and the legitimacy that being a married woman in 1956, 1958 could bring her. It's interesting the way they put it in the show because, like you said, she was married and divorced several times. She took it seriously, but at the same time, she never seemed to me to be the type of person who was looking for, quote, the one. In my mind, I keep thinking of Elizabeth Taylor, who just, got married so many times. Not necessarily for fun, but, she enjoyed being married. She, I assume, enjoyed having all these different spouses, but it wasn't, I guess, not the same level as you would imagine if she had just gotten married only one time or only 2 times. You know what I'm saying?
And I wonder with both of those examples, Ginny and Elizabeth Taylor, how different their lives would have been if society hadn't put so much pressure on them each to be married. If it had just been just hook up and have a good time, and it wouldn't be nearly the same ordeal, I suppose.
With the Elizabeth Taylor example, you have her when she was attached to the studio. She had this big white wedding to Nicky Hilton, and it was supposed to be, the most glamorous and joyous of occasions, and then, for it only to end in divorce a relatively short time later. I feel like Ginny's kind of in a similar position in that, she has done the expected thing. She has gotten married, she's had the children, and now it hasn't worked out, and so she finds herself in a place saying, well, now what do I do? Now what's the plan? There's no real societal script for this.
And so then Bill drives Ginny home in his awesome car. I love that car.
Yeah.
It's the best. And they argue about Betty, and then they sort of dance around the topic of his proposition from the pilot, and there's this really weird moment where she gets out of the car, and she says, can we talk about what this is really all about? And she gives him this really knowing, funny look, And then he just looks at her and completely is, I'm not going to, obviously he's not going to talk about it. And he just says, I don't know what you mean. And her whole face just changes. And it almost makes me think that she changes her mind about what she wants to talk about, because I feel like she starts out wanting to be like, look, you've obviously got a thing for me. We need to talk about this. And then it turns into, I know you're keeping me hanging on purpose. And I guess it's kind of a subtle shift. And did you feel the same way about it? Did you think that she changed her mind, or she changed her approach in what she was originally going to say?
Yeah, there was a sense for me that she was holding back from him, especially like you said, because there's that hesitation and there's that prelude to the conversation that she had imagined having, in the very beginning of this episode. And then all of a sudden he's not reacting in the way that she thought he would, and so suddenly she feels like she doesn't know what to say, or that if she does say what she originally intended, who knows where it might lead.
So we are left at the end of this episode and throughout, the next few episodes with no clear answer on where they're going with Bill's proposition. Like there's never any clear definitive response from either one of them, and it doesn't get brought up again for several episodes, which is an interesting decision. I feel like a lesser, dumber show would have them dance around it, and it would get name dropped or mentioned once an episode, and it would be this build up, and then, it would culminate in a very special episode, and it would be stupid.
I almost enjoyed the way that they danced around it because, considering particularly that this was a real life situation, you're obviously not going to go into work Monday through Friday and bring up this very awkward and strange and emotionally fraught request every single day.
It's far more realistic to have, and it's almost a miscommunication, not a direct one, but just sort of by circumstance. Like,
right,
they're, kind of approaching it, and then maybe they're not talking about it, and he's pretending to not know what she's talking about, and it's more true to life. And I don't want to, and we haven't talked about Ethan at all this episode, and Ethan's sexual sexcapades. Ethan and his sexcapades.
The note that I wrote down on Ethan was Ethan and the awkward sex.
Forever.
Yeah.
For the rest of his life. So Ethan kind of runs the course through, and I think it's amazing that he runs up to Jane and Austen at lunch and just outright is like, who's the sluttiest girl in this hospital? Who can I get with right now who will, just scratch that itch?
I have needs, people.
I'm important, and I'm a handsome doctor, and someone is going to service me.
And I really like the way that they treated that whole situation, because it really does feel like a couple of high school kids just sort of gabbing at lunch like, ooh, tell me who that girl is. She's hot and I heard she's slutty, Yes,
and the amazing imagery of Bernadette not only sticking that entire pickle in her mouth, but then the Franken buns, the parking lot that they're having their little episode in was pretty good. I think that kind of ties back to the tongue-in-cheek nature of the credits, which I really appreciated. Did you want to talk at all about Jane and Austen and kind of the more, I guess, defined differences between them? When I first saw Jane, and this isn't anything against Helena York, she kind of has this aesthetic that's very Marilyn Monroe. The blonde curls and the big round eyes and kind of the surprised expression much of the time. She just seems very airy, not airheaded, but airy in a way.
Yeah, it's very Jane Mansfield.
Yeah, that's an even better example. And Austen should be this charming, dashing, totally in control doctor, but then he winds up being the desperate one. He winds up just practically begging her, and she winds up with a copy of Simone de Beauvoir in her hands at lunch, which is, that sealed the deal on Jane being an MVP for me.
Yeah, I loved that. Jane really isn't as confident as Virginia or as forthright as Betty, but she's very sly in her own way, and I liked that, especially with the Simone de Beauvoir nod. You get this real sense that this experiment is maybe triggering an interest in the field for her and maybe spurring her to larger ambitions, which I really appreciated.
One thing, it's nice to see that they didn't go for the trope of, oh, she falls in love with the man that they pair her up with, and he wants her so badly, and she gives in and rewards him by starting an affair with him full time, and just her whole justification and just kind of validation of the participation in the study for them. It was different when they were anonymous. It was completely different when he just says, well, let's just have sex. Like, for him, what's the difference? Like a few wires? For her, it's this huge, shift in purpose, and it completely changes meaning. It's really interesting that Jane, I don't know, just doesn't feel any guilt about. I mean, they're cheating on his wife. That's exactly what they did, and she doesn't seem to give it any second thought.
I did like that, just sort of thinking about her emotional sort of starting point in this episode, which is, if we're doing it for the science, it's fine because they're just measuring physiological data. But if you want to take me in this closet for no reason other than you like me, I don't know where I am with that.
And it's nice that Jane is set up early as kind of a nerd in disguise. That
yes.
She's this big, she reads big, heavy philosophical texts. She's a secretary. This is not what you expect from just looking at this character. And on paper, she just does not seem like she would be reading de Beauvoir. And then, magically, wonderfully, Lester comes along later, and it's a totally different story. So I just love Jane. She's my favorite.
Let's see. I want to talk a little bit about Betty and Helen in lieu of our first mention of the Pretzel King.
Oh, yeah.
What did you think about her justification for that? I won't go into spoilers for another TV show, but we have had this conversation in a different context recently as far as gay men and women sort of being in the closet and trying to do what's expected of them versus what societally is more important. How did you think that was portrayed here?
Annalee Ashford brought excellent pathos to the discussion when she says, I love Helen, and she understands why I'm doing this. And I thought for the longest time that Helen was a fellow prostitute in the brothel, and that they saw each other, and that they probably, lived together. But then the casting news that we've had come out of that, and kind of the subtle descriptions we've had, and touching on what the characters really like, it doesn't seem like that at all. She brought a very humanizing element to it that was, it was too bad to see really that Betty has to close herself off. Obviously she's this very open, free-spirited type of character, but the fact that in order to survive she has to hide and shift whole portions of her life around. I kept wondering whether she was a lesbian or if she was bisexual, given the nature of her work, if that was just something that she totally closed off, like that was, that was work with a capital W, or if it was something that she could go
parlay for herself.
Parlay for herself.
Yeah, now that you bring that up, I think that's an excellent point. But, given that this is 1956, 58, I can't remember if the year has changed here or not, but
the time is a little squidgy in the first season.
Yeah, but obviously, there's no term to describe, here's where I am on the Kinsey scale, really, at this point. I thought it was interesting, too, how in that context, the show, I would say, artificially attempts to set Jenny up as the, quote, voice of reason, Helen, you shouldn't do this if it's only going to be, for your children, for convenience. You would have to create a life out of this lie. And Betty sort of saying, look, thank you for your opinion, but you don't really get to decide what's best for me, given your situation and given where you're standing. It was kind of a check your privilege moment.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. What did you think of the ending on the comic book and the spaceman floating out in space, that kind of little parable there at the end with Bill looking out the window?
I remember when this episode aired, and again, when I rewatched it, I looked up the title of that song, which closes out, and it's called Retrograde. And I really enjoyed the lingering on that moment, because here you have, in the comic book, this little boy who just feels really adrift and alone, and not for any particular reason, but just because he intrinsically feels he doesn't fit in, and so he's reaching for something greater. And I really kind of liked that, even if it was a more overt nod to where all of our characters are at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. What did you think?
I thought it was a nice closeout, and I wish that they would have brought it back a little bit more strongly. I thought it was kind of a visual thread that they could have revisited, and they kind of do. In the last couple of episodes, they get the Man High Project, and they get the military members going up in the hot, in the atmospheric balloons, and it sort of is revisited in Henry's obsession with the space race. It was a really intense, very specific visual aesthetic. And then the show just kind of never came back around to that. I don't know. I think I would have liked for them to pick up some element of that style again.
I guess that's just something I never considered because I liked sort of the fleeting imagery.
Bill and Scully talking in the hallway. This is more towards the middle of the episode. Bill pacing and dodging. He seems really, he really doubles down on his demands for the study.
Yeah, what did you think about sort of the dynamic that's a continuation of what we see from them in the pilot?
It's very paternalistic. Barton is going to say, you know, you're dressing up in a suit of armor to fight a plate of whipped cream, and it's kind of the sort of thing that not a father would say to a son, but a father figure would say to a son figure, you know, come on, you know, I know you and we've known each other for a really long time, and I know that this is the kind of method that you use, and I know you do because I've experienced this and I've seen this in the past, you know, it's talking on a very personal level, and then Bill just won't have any of that level of it. He refuses to respond on that level. He's just going to have his little fit and he's going to turn around and walk away. And it really, I think it highlights the fact that they have that paternalistic relationship before ever really getting into their particular past and being out in Rochester with each other.
I also think it's almost fraternal in a way, because you have sort of Scully as this knowing older brother, like, all right, buddy, let me tell you, you are too short-sighted to see this, but here's how it should go down. I know I have life experience, and Bill just sort of, like you said, refusing to hear it and really concocting these scenarios in his own mind. Well, you know, if I say this, then suddenly if I twist this, you will give me X. You know, not really.
It was kind of a petulant response to Barton.
It was.
So I guess that's what made me think of it as kind of a father-son thing.
I felt it was younger brother and older brother, and sort of maybe in the next 10 seconds, one of them would just punch the other in the arm and walk away, you know?
Well, the other thing that I've got in my notes is Ethan sitting in his car outside of Ginny's house, which is creepy.
Oh my God. I really wonder how they envisioned Ethan in these first few episodes, because he seems like a collection of maybe 2 or 3 different characters and different trajectories that they had for him.
Well, and it's surprising to me that with the way he punched Virginia in the face in the pilot episode, there's to be expected. There's going to be a lot of comments like, oh, you know, he's, you know, and the expectation is that he's going to disappear from the show pretty quickly. But
right.
He stuck around for the rest of the season, and even though the actor, you know, was supposed to be on How I Met Your Dad, I think the character of Ethan, even if he's not in season 2, I think that he will return further down the line. I think he's very much here to stay in the sense that after such a huge break, I think they're really going to subvert expectations with conveniently pushing him out of the way between seasons, you know? I think he's going to come back. I think this is one of those shows where the cast is going to get really big, but people are going to come back, because that's really what happened in real life. I think I'm seeing a particular role that he's going to fulfill.
They spent so much time with him in the pilot and then in this episode, and sort of trying to draw out all the different sides of his character, or what they thought his character was going to be, that you really do figure out that he's in for the long haul and not just someone who's going to drop in for a 3-episode arc and then just mysteriously vanish.
Yeah. Right, are we good?
I would say that we're good. So everybody who's listening, thank you so much.
Thank you.
We are posting this on Tumblr about every week.
So we're just going to keep doing these in the lead up to season 2, and so we'll be back sometime soon, next time with episode 3.
All right, we'll see you all then.
Bye.